Hey there, everybody. This is lesson 1 of chapter 2. Lesson 1 is on page 89, so make sure you're there, page 89. Lesson 1 is called decimals and fractions, and our learning objective for this lesson is I can write decimals as fractions and fractions as decimals. So in this chapter, or in this lesson rather, we are going to figure out how to take a decimal and write it as a fraction. And then we're going to do the opposite. How do we take a fraction and write it as a decimal? So those are the two things we're going to do. Now the first thing we need to do is this real world link. We need to remember how to say decimals. So when you say this 0.25, in words, it is 25 hundredths. So right here in words, 25 hundredths. All right, then write this in. 25 hundredths as a fraction is 25 over 100, 25 hundredths. So this one, percussion, 0.15. In word form, what's that called? 15 what? 15, it's in the hundredths place. It ends in the hundredths place. 15 hundredths. So as a fraction, it's 15 over 100. Okay, now I'm going to change this up a little bit. What if it was just 0.3? 0.3 in word form is 3 what? 3 tenths. So 0.3 as a fraction would be 3 over 10. All right, now let's try to add something to this. What if we did 0.291? So in word form, 0.291 is 291 what? What place is this? 291 thousandths. So 291 thousandths. If you wrote that as a fraction, it'd be 291 over 1,000. So just to review, this is the tenths place. This ends in the hundredths place. This ends in the thousandths place. So when you have tenths, there's a 10 in the denominator. Hundredths has a 100 in the denominator. Thousandths has a 1,000 in the denominator. So that's going to be really important in this lesson. Let's turn to chapter 90 and look at the first example. So again, in this first part, we're going to write decimals as fractions, and we're also going to look at mixed numbered with those fractions. It says decimals like 0.25, 0.15, and 0.31, 0.29 can be written as fractions with denominators of 10, 100, 1,000, and so on. Any number that can be written as a fraction is a rational number. So decimals like 3.25, 26.82, and 125.54 can be written as mixed numbers in simplest form. Think about how you say these: 3 and 25 hundredths, 26 and 82 hundredths, 125 and 54 hundredths. So if you can say the decimal, then you can hear how to write it as a fraction. Let's look at example 1. And I like this because it has a reminder of place value. So if the decimal's here, this is the tenths, hundredths, and thousandths place. So look, tenths, hundredths, thousandths. And this is the 1, tens, hundreds, thousands place when you go to the left of the decimal. Refer back to this chart as much as you need to. So we need to write each decimal as a fraction and then simplify it to simplest form. So 0.6. It says the place value chart shows that the place value of the last decimal place is in the tenths. So this 0.6 is in the tenths place. So you could say that 0.6 is 6 tenths. So then you write 6 over 10. Now, to simplify this, they just kind of did this cross-off thing. But remember how we simplified. We divided by the greatest common factor. which is 2 in this situation. So 6 divided by 2 and 10 divided by 2, that gives you the 3/5 that you see right here. So 6/10 as a fraction in simplest form is 3/5. All right. Hey, you know what? While we're right here, this is really important that we start to memorize these. It's going to be really helpful. It says, here are some commonly used decimal and fraction equivalencies. So 1/10 is written as 1/10. 2/10 is 2/10, but simplified it's 1/5. 0.25 is 25 hundredths. When you put 25 over 100 and you simplify it by dividing by 25 divided by 25, you get 1/4. 5/10 simplified, when you divide by 5 and divide by 5, you get 1/2. Let me go back and do this. 2/10 divide by 2 divide by 2, that's how you get 1/5. Now, 0.75 is 75 hundredths. So when you set up 75 hundredths, if you divide by 25, divide by 25, that's where you get 3/4. So that's the fraction in simplest form. It really is helpful to memorize this, that this is a half, this is a quarter, this is 3/4, and then this is 1/5. All right, let's look at example 2. So in example 2, we have 0.45. So the first thing you do is you say that in words, 45 hundredths, because the 5 is in the hundredths place. So 45 hundredths looks like this as a fraction. Now we need to simplify it. So if you're simplifying 45 hundredths, you divide 45 and 100 by the greatest common factor, 5, and that's where you get the 9 and the 20. 45 divided by 5 is 9, 100 divided by 5 is 20. 9/20 is the answer. It's the fraction in simplest form. Okay, 0.375 said in words is 375 thousandths, because the 5 is in the thousandths place. So you put 375 over 1,000. Now, this is tricky because you might not just off the top of your head know the greatest common factor. So just a reminder, you might want to use, like, for example, a factor tree to find the greatest common factor. So that's what I've been doing. Off to the side, I'll kind of go like this, 375. Now I'm just going to go here, 375. I wonder if that can divide by 3. So I take my calculator, 375 divided by 3 is 125. So 3 times 125. There's my prime factor right there. Now 125, I bet that can be divided by 5 because it ends in a 5. Let's see, 5 times 25. All right, now 25 is 5 times 5. So here are my prime factors right there. Now if I do the same with 1,000, I'm going to do that right here. 1,000. Well, that's 2 and 500. There's a prime. 500, 2 times 250. There's a prime. 250 divided by 5. What is that? 50? 250 divided by 5. Yep, so 5 and 50. There's a prime. Here's my 2 and 25. There's a prime. There's my 5 times 5. There are my primes. Now, what do I do to get the greatest common factor? I see what they have in common. They both have a 5, both have a 5, both have a 5. So, 5 times 5 times 5. 5 times 5 is 25. 25 times 5, 125. So, that would be my greatest common factor. So 375 divided by 125 and 1,000 divided by 125. Let's see if it gets that 3/8. 375 divided by 125. There's the 3. And then 1,000 divided by 25. what? Oh, 125. 1,000, that would help. Divided by 125 is the 8. All right, cool. So that's how you get 3/8. So in our reflection later, we're going to have to say how we write a decimal of a fraction in simplest form. So the first thing we did was we said the decimal in words. Then we turned the decimal into a fraction. And then we divided by the greatest common factor to simplify. So let's write that down. 1. Say decimal in words. 2. Write it as a fraction. 3. Divide by greatest common factor to simplify. All right, so that's how we do writing decimals as fractions. And here's the practice. So let's do it. Let's say it in words. It's 8/10. So let's write 8/10 as a fraction. Then let's divide by the greatest common factor. 2, right? 8 divided by 2, 10 divided by 2. So that's 4/5. All right, now let's do the next one. What are the steps? Say it, the decimal in words, write it as a fraction, divide by the greatest common factor. So 28/100. So let's write that as a fraction, 28/100. Now, divide by the greatest common factor. Let's see, 28 is, we can do 7. 7 times 4. Break 4 down into 2 and 2. 7, 2, 2. What about 100? 2 and 50. 2 and 25. 5 and 5, right? So we have two twos that are the same. 2 times 2 is 4. So the greatest common factor must be 4. Divide by 4. Divide by 4. 28 divided by 4 is 7. 100 divided by 4 is 25. Those can't be broken down any further, so the answer is 7/25. Cool, let's do the last one. Now look at this was in the tenths place, this was in the hundredths place, this is in the thousandths place. So let's say it, 125 thousandths. Write it as a fraction, 125 thousandths. Hey, I think 100 can be divided by 125. That's, I think, the greatest common factor. Let's check. 1,000. 1,000 divided by 125. Yep, it can be. So let's divide by 125 to simplify it. 1/8. There's our answer. So over here, 1/8. All right, now there is one more little example up here on the next page, example 4. And this example uses a mixed number. These over here did not have mixed numbers. It was just a 0 in the ones place. This has an actual number in the ones place. So let's see what we do. The average length of a conch shell is 9 8/85 inches. 9.85 is 9 8/85. Express 9.85 as a mixed number in simplest form. So say 9.85 the correct way, 9 8/85. Write it out as a fraction, 9 8/85, and then go ahead and simplify. Now, 85 and 100, I'm thinking you can probably just divide by 5 as the greatest common factor. So 85 divided by 5, is 17. See, that's where they got the 17. And 100 divided by 5 is 20. So then you just bring the 9 back. 9 17/20, or written like this, 9 17/20 inches. So basically, you follow these same steps. It's just that you have a whole number in the ones place. Let's do an example together. It takes approximately 4.65 quarts of milk to make a pound of cheese. Express this amount as a mixed number in simplest form. So let's say it, 4 and 65 hundredths. 4 and 65 hundredths. Let's divide by 5. 65 divided by 5 is 13. 100 divided by 5 is 20. So you've got the 4 and 13 twentieths. Now, you can't break down 13 and 20 anymore, so that's as simple as it gets. So our answer, just put those two together. 4 and 13 twentieths. All right, sweet. So now we've done the first half. This is how you turn a decimal into a fraction. So now we're just going to flip-flop it. We're going to start with a fraction and end up with a decimal. It says, for fractions with denominators that are factors of 10, 100, or 1,000, you can write equivalent fractions with these denominators. So here's what we're going to try to do. We're going to try to have a fraction, and if we can, we're going to try to get 10, 100, or 1,000 in the denominator so we can easily just turn it into a decimal. It's like we're doing the opposite of what we just did over here. So it says, write 9/12 as a decimal. Method 1 is to write an equivalent fraction. See, we're trying to get 10, 100, or 1,000 in the denominator. Method 2 is you can divide the numerator by the denominator. So let's take a close look at method 1. Method 1. Watch this. You can't easily go from 12 to 10, 100, or 1,000. But if you simplify this, 9 over 12, divide both by 3, you get 3 over 4. Now when you have a 4, you can easily take a 4 to a 100. 4 times 25 is 100, so do the same here to the numerator. 3 times 25 is 75. When you read this fraction, 75 100ths, with the 100 in the denominator, you can easily write that as a decimal, 75 100ths. Now, let's look at this method. It involves long division. You can divide the numerator by the denominator, so it's 9 divided by 12. So when you set up 9 divided by 12, it'll look like that, but 12 can't go into 9. So you have to add the decimal and a 0. 12 can go into 90 7 times. So up here, you put 0 point because you want to put that decimal right above. You put the 7 right above the 0 because it can go into 90. 12 times 7 is 84. 90 take away 84 is 6. Bring down the 0. 12 goes into 60 5 times. 12 times 5 is 60. There's no remainder. So there's your decimal, 0.75. So which way do you like better? Sometimes this way works better. Sometimes when you can't figure out how to get 10, 100, or 1,000 in the denominator, you just might have to straight up do long division. So let's look down here. 3/5. Can we turn 5 into a 10, 100, or 1,000 easily? Yeah, 5 can easily turn into 10. How? Times what? How can we get 10 over here? 5 times 2. So 3 times 2 is 6. 6 tenths. How do you write that as a decimal? 6 in the tenths place. There you go, 6 tenths. So E is 0.6, 6 tenths. 14 over 25. Can we easily get a 10, a 100, or a 1,000 over here with setting up equivalent fractions? 25 times 4 is 100. 25 times 4. 14 times 4. All right, 14 times 4, 56. 56 hundredths. 0.56 is 56 hundredths. Now look at what they gave us here. They gave us a nice easy number that can get to 1,000. 250 times 4 is 1,000. 102 times 4, 2, 3, 4, 8, 408. 408 thousandths. 408 thousandths. There it is, 0.408. In this situation, we didn't need to really do the long division. We could have done 102 divided by 250, but it was really easy to get 10, 100, or 1,000 in the denominator. Now, in the guided practice in a minute, you're going to see one that long division would be easier. All right, here we go. Let's take a look at this last example. And by the way, this example is kind of weird. I'm going to be honest. It's like they try to trick you. It says a caterpillar can have as many as 4,000 muscles compared to humans who have about 600. Write the length of the caterpillar as a decimal. These numbers right here have nothing to do with the length. So this is like crazy talk. Where is the length? It's in this picture. So weird. This question is weird. So you got to look at the picture. The length is 1 3/8 inches, and we need to turn that into a decimal. So it's the same thing when you have a mixed number. You can just keep the 1, and we turn this 3/8 into, well, can we turn 8 into 10? Not really. 8 into 100. If you do 100 divided by 8, that's not going to give you a nice happy number. 12.5. What if you did 1,000 divided by 8? Ooh, that's 125. So look, 8 times 125 is 1,000. 3 times 125 is 375. So you have 1 375 thousandths. 1 375 thousandths is 1.375. The length of the caterpillar, 1.375 inches as a decimal. So let's review what we did here. Kind of like what we did over here. When we have a fraction and we want to turn it into a decimal, the first thing we want to try to do is, number 1, if we can write an equivalent fraction with a 10, 100, or 1,000 in the denominator, do it. 2. If not, then divide the numerator by the denominator. Do the long division. Divide numerator by denominator. Long division. Okay, so that is it for all of the lesson examples. The next step is going to be practicing these 6 right here in the guided practice. All right, let's make sure that you're in the guided practice. What I want you to do is I want you to try this, and then, so what you'll do is you'll pause it, do number 1, then push play and see if you got it right. This 1, 2, and 3 is the first part of the chapter, or the lesson. Write a decimal as a fraction or mixed number in simplest form. So remember the steps. You have to say the decimal in words, write it as a fraction, divide it by the greatest common factor to simplify it. Remember, we're on page 92. So let's say it in words. 4/10. Write it as a fraction. 4/10. Divide by the greatest common factor. 2. And that gets you 2/5. So there we go. 2/5. All right, let's say this one. 64 hundredths. Oh, go ahead and pause it if you need to. And then do it, and then check it. So 64 hundredths. Now, what's the greatest common factor? Let's see here. 64, I'm going to break this down into 2 and 32. Break down 32 into 2 and 16. So break down 16 into 4 and 4. Oh my gosh, 2 and 2. 2 and 2. Look at all those 2s. All right, what about 100? What about, let's do a bigger number, 4 and 25. That breaks down into 2 and 2. This breaks down into 5 and 5. So they have 2 2s in common. 2 times 2 is 4. So that's our greatest common factor. Divide by 4, divide by 4. 64 divided by 4, 16, I think. Yep. So 16, that's 25. That can't be broken down anymore. So that's our answer. All right. Pause this next one and try it. This one has a 2 in the ones place. Okay, so you have 2. Let's say it. 2 and 75 hundredths. 2 and 75 hundredths. Let's divide by 25. So that leaves 3 and 4. So 2 and 3/4. Oops. By the way, did you recognize that 0.75 is 3/4? Remember how we wanted you to memorize these eventually? You're going to get this in your head that 0.75 is 3/4. Cool. All right, now we're going to do number 4, 5, and 6. This is the opposite. We are given a fraction and we need to write it as a decimal. And in this one, you have the mixed number fraction. So we want to try to get in the denominator a 10, a 100, or a 1,000. Remember, that's our goal right here. Number 1, write an equivalent fraction with a 10, 100, or 1,000 in the denominator. Or if not, or if you prefer, you can do long division. On this, I kind of want to show you both. So look, 75 can't go into 10 or 100. Can it go into 1,000? No, it's a decimal. So you know what? There's no choice. We have to do the long division on this one. 27 divided by 75. So let's talk this through. You know what? You could set this up. See if you remember how to do it. 27 divided by 75. Pause it and then see if you got it right. If you don't know how to do this, do it with me. So we need to add a decimal because 75 can't go into 27. So I'm going to add 0.0. 75 can go into 270. How many times? 270 divided by 75. It can go in 3 times. So you put the 3 here. Then 75 times 3 is 225. All right, so 75 times 3 is 225. Let's do the subtraction. Oh, by the way, we needed to put this decimal up here, remember? You got to bring the decimal up. So 45. 75 cannot go into 45, so you have to add another 0. You bring it down. 450. So 450 divided by 75. It can go in there 6 times. And it was a whole number. So 75 times 6 is 450 without a remainder. 0.36 is your answer. Now, let's see. Do we need to do long division here? 2 times something is 10. 2 times what is 10? 5. So pause it. See if you can get an equivalent fraction and write a decimal from it. All right, here's me doing it. 2 times 5. 7 times 5. 2 times 5 is 10. 7 times 5 is 35. Ooh, this got weird. Because how do you write 35 tenths? How do you write 35 tenths? This is like a mixed number. 35 tenths is 3 and 5 tenths. 3 and 5 tenths written as a decimal. 3 and 5 tenths. Let's just say you use long division. Long division, 7 divided by 2. 7 divided by 2. 2 goes into 7. 2 times 3 is 6. 2 times 3 is 6. That leaves a 1. 2 can't go into 1. So let's do our decimal here. Let's bring down a 0. 2 can go into 10. 2 times 5 is 10. No remainder. 3.5. So if this freaks you out, turning this into a mixed number and then calling it 3 and 5/10, maybe long division. If you're like, whoa, I got lost, you can always go back to long division because long division will work. So this is 3.5. All right, let's try this one. 3 and 1/5. So if you have 3 and 1/5, can we get the denominator into a 10, 100, or 1,000? 5 can easily turn into a 10. Times it by 2, right? So 1 times 2 is 2. So we have 3 and 2/10. 3 and 2/10. That one's easy. 3 and 2/10. 3.2. So this was an easy one to do the equivalent fractions with. This one, if you got a little stuck on that right there, you might have wanted to go to the long division. In this one, we definitely wanted to do the long division because we couldn't easily turn 75 into 10, 100, or 1,000. All right, your next step is going to be the independent practice. Let's do 6 of these. Do these 1, 2, 3, and 4. Now, I'm having you do 1, 2, 3, and 4 because some of those are super duper easy. Trust me. It's like, honestly, you don't even need to show work for these two. Okay? These you do need to show work for. And then do numbers 6 and 7 for writing the fraction as a mixed number or decimal. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 6, and 7. That's it. All right, that's your independent practice. Go do it. All right, we are on page 93. We're going to check the independent practice. Take a look at number 1. Now listen, seriously, remember this is one of the ones that we want to memorize. 5/10 is 1/2. But to show you the work here, 5/10 divided by 5 is 1/2. All right, this one you didn't even need to show work because when you write 7/10 in a fraction form, it can't be simplified anymore. Same with 33/100. 33/100. You can't simplify it anymore. So that's why you didn't need to show work for those. Now this one, 875,000ths. I found the greatest common factor. They all shared the prime factors of 5s. 5 times 5 times 5 is 125. So I divided numerator and denominator by 125. It gave me 7/8. Now, this next part, we have to change the fraction into a decimal. I showed both ways for this one. So I took 1/20 and I tried to get 100 in the denominator. 20 times 5 is 100. 1 times 5 is 5. 5/100ths is written 0.05. Here's long division. So I had the 1 divided by 20. Well, 20 can't go into 1 and 20 can't go into 10. 20 could go into 100 5 times. So I brought up the decimal, I added the zeros, it went into it 5 times. 20 times 5 is 100, no remainder. This one, you had to do long division because you couldn't get this into 10, 100, or 1,000. So 12 divided by 75, I added the 0. I brought up the decimal and a 0. 75 could go into 120 one time. 1 times 75 is 75. Take away, you get 45. Bring down another 0. Calculated, how many times does 75 go into 450? And I got 6. 75 times 6 is 450. Remainder of 0. All right, so remember, try to do equivalent fractions if you can. That's the easiest. If not, go ahead and do the long division. All right, the next step is going to be our reflection for learning objective A. So you're going to need to get your math journal. So let's take a look at the reflection together. For Chapter 2, Lesson 1, the learning objective is, I can write decimals as fractions and fractions as decimals. So you have two things here. This is writing a decimal as a fraction, and this is writing a fraction as a decimal. All right, so number one, to write a decimal as a fraction in simplest form, I need to do what? There were 3 steps that we covered in our lesson. What you need to say out loud, then how you need to write the fraction, and then how to simplify the fraction. Then go ahead and do an example with 0.15, turning that into a fraction in simplest form. For part 2, we wrote this in our math book too. We wrote the 2 ways to write a fraction as a decimal. So what are the 2 ways to write a fraction as a decimal? Remember, there's the one that is with equivalent fractions. And then if you can't do that, you have to do something else. So if you can't remember those 2 ways, look and see what we wrote in our math book. Then do an example here, turning 9/20 into a decimal. All right, when you're done with your reflection, your teacher can take a look at it.